When these terrifying voices were caught on camera in a haunted basement, paranormal investigators couldn't believe their ears. Join us today as we look at this and other amazing stories of spooky things caught on camera. Our first story comes from Maddie. While going through her grandmother's house after she had passed away, Maddie found an old projector in the attic. Wanting to see if it still worked, Maddie took the projector downstairs into her own basement to plug it in. She got the projector set up, turned it on, and put a movie in. As she was getting ready to watch the movie with some friends, she heard some strange sounds coming from the back of her basement. At first she thought that maybe it was just mice. After all, it is a basement, and it is fairly common to hear scurrying noises from little paws. However, the sounds continued, and they definitely didn't sound like mice. Maybe it was just the pipes, she thought. But the noises weren't random. They seemed to be following her around the basement. This was extremely unsettling for Maddie, but she decided that the best course of action would be to just ignore it and enjoy her movie. And so she did. That was until the scratching sounds started to get louder and more aggressive, as though whatever was making them was trying to get her attention. Maddie turned the lights off and tried to focus on the movie, but the commotion from behind her continued to increase. Suddenly, she heard what sounded like footsteps. The footsteps started slow and then increased in speed as something heavy pounded down her basement stairs. Maddie screamed and ran out of the basement, tripping over her own feet in her haste to get away. Now refusing to go back down the stairs, she called her friend to come over and help her figure out what was down there. Together, they went down the stairs with a baseball bat and a flashlight. They shone the light around the basement and listened intently. Then they heard it again, the distinct sound of heavy footsteps pounding down her basement stairs. Once again the sound stopped as quickly as it started. Was it her imagination? Her and her friend decided to head back upstairs, but as they reached the top of the stairs, the commotion began once again. It was as if whatever was in the basement wanted them to come back down. Curious, the two friends slowly went back down the stairs, shining their light around the basement. They checked everywhere, but there was nothing there. Eventually they gave up and left the basement. Maddie never went back down those stairs after that night, and the projector remains in her basement collecting dust. Our next story comes from Angela. Angela and her husband Mike had just purchased a home and were busy packing when they started hearing strange noises coming from the basement. One day, while they were sorting through some boxes, they heard what sounded like whispers coming from the basement. At first they thought nothing of it, but the whispers continued to grow louder and more frequent. Eventually they decided that they needed to investigate. Armed with flashlights and a video camera, they headed down the basement stairs to investigate. What they captured on that camera would shock them. As they walked down the basement, they heard the whispers becoming louder and louder. Finally, they rounded a corner and saw what looked like a dark shadow standing at the end of the hallway. Startled, they turned and ran for the basement door. When they got back upstairs, they watched the video back. On it, you could clearly see the shadow and hear the whispers. Though they never saw anything else, the couple reported hearing regular scratching and whispering for many years afterwards. Our next story comes from Tristan. Tristan and his girlfriend were moving into his new apartment. They were going through his stuff, unpacking boxes, when he started to hear strange sounds coming from the basement. These sounds included shaking, thumping, even what sounded like screams. Of course, he knew that there were probably just animals down there, but he decided to check anyway. Armed with a flashlight and an old baseball bat, he headed down the basement stairs. As he reached the bottom, he heard a loud crash, followed by what sounded like a scream. His heart racing, he started to walk towards where he heard the noise, swinging the bat in front of him. He shone his light around the room and finally saw what had made the noise. It was a small box that had fallen off of a shelf. Relieved that it was nothing more than a box, he grabbed it and put it back on the shelf. Just then, he heard a loud bang and the sound of something heavy dragging itself across the basement floor. Quickly he turned and ran for the basement door, not stopping until he was safely back in his apartment above. Shaken by the experience, he called his friend Ben to come over and help him investigate further. Together, they headed down the stairs and listened intently. All they could hear was the sound of their own breathing. They checked everywhere but could find nothing. After a few hours, they gave up and closed the basement door. Our next story comes from Jessica. Jessica and her family had always been skeptical of ghosts and the paranormal. believed that there was nothing more than what they could see and explain away. That was until they moved into their new home, and Jessica's daughter started talking about the ghost that lived in the basement. Of course, Jessica just thought that her daughter was being imaginative, a product of her wild imagination. However, one day they were watching television in the living room when they heard strange noises coming from the basement. Jessica went to investigate, assuming that it was just mice, or maybe just the house settling. She carried on investigating, and that's when she saw it. In the corner of the room was a rocking chair that wasn't there before. Not wanting to make a fuss, she simply ignored it and went back to watching TV. However, the rocking continued to increase in pace. Soon it was rocking so fast that it was almost flying around the room. Of course, Jessica was scared, but she decided not to let it show. She went back down to the basement to confront the rocking chair, but it had stopped. Still, she noticed that the rocking chair was slightly damaged. She sat in it and rocked gently. Then suddenly, it started rocking faster and faster, just like before. Panicked, she jumped out of the chair and ran for the basement door. From that day on, whenever Jessica went into the basement, the rocking chair would start rocking. Sometimes it would even rock on its own without anyone in it. Jessica and her family decided to sell the home and move. When these investigators entered a haunted house, they couldn't believe their ears. When they heard what sounded like a little girl crying, as they investigated further, they heard what sounded like footsteps and dragging metal moans. Then suddenly they saw it. A metal-tipped wheelchair rolled past them into the darkness. Startled, they turned and ran for the door. If you enjoyed this video and want to see another just like it, then be sure to click the link on screen now. With that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.